This is Anne Bogart, and I'm so delighted to be sharing this space with the fabulous Debra Winger, whose voice you're going to hear now, who jumped in for a moment. But Debra, hi.
What space is this that we're sharing?
It's called Virtual Space, Debra. And if you don't mind, Debra, I'm going to talk a little bit about you for a moment and about me and how we met, and then we're going to dive in. But just to give a little context, I want to say, first of all, I'm really delighted to be here in this virtual space with Debra in the other virtual space, which is Ohio, because Debra's actually from Ohio, which is remarkable. And I just want to say that I'm excited to do this because Debra is one of my favorite people in the entire planet. And we met, as a theater director. I was directing a show at ART, and Debra and her husband, her fabulous husband, Arliss Howard, came in to watch a rehearsal at ART. And somehow the vibes connected, I think, between Debra and me. Would you say that's true, Debra?
Well, I was vibing, so if you were vibing, then I guess we were.
But we were kind of vibing together. And what's remarkable is because we are, in a way, so different. Debra comes from one world and I come from another one. And yet I found her to be one of the most instructive people I know in the world, somebody with an incredible intellect and incredible observations about the world. So all of these things add up to being happy to be here and with Debra, who's upstate New York. Debra, would you describe where you are right now?
Well, I can't start without first saying how difficult this is for me, not because of, the latest political machinations, not because of the pandemic or the variant, but because it's so hard for me not to interrupt. And I can't interrupt because we're on Zoom. And you said so many things that I would have interrupted, starting with anything complimentary and ending with, a joke, which it's very hard for me, as you know, not to interrupt when I have a good one-liner. But in answer to your question, Anne Bogart, friend of mine, I am sitting in the lovely Catskill Mountains. It is the first day that I believe we've had actual sunlight, sun showing through the clouds since 2021 began, although there might have been a half of another day. And I'm here on my solar powered farm. You can probably feel the vibrations coming through the Ethernet from my panels.
I've been to that farm, and it's one of my favorite places on earth. And it's very, very secluded, and it's in a beautiful part of the Catskills. But I also know that you were recently in New Zealand, which I think is amazing, and it kind of brings us to the world we're living in. And you went to New Zealand to work, and you went there with Arliss, your husband Arliss, your glorious husband Arliss. And I wonder if you might describe what life there is compared to life in our culture, because I think I spoke to you when you were in quarantine, which was very severe, but I wonder if you could just kind of describe what's happening in New Zealand, which I think is interesting to everybody in the current COVID crisis we're experiencing.
Well, what's happening in New Zealand is life as sort of usual, because except that they can't travel out and back without quarantining. And there's nowhere really to go, because why would you leave a place where there's no community transmission to go into an infected world? So life is actually booming there. Local artists are more accessible, have more accessibility to their own audience. I mean, it's really interesting to see to be there for that moment of buy local, cherish local, and a lot of people that spend half the year abroad had come home. So yeah, it was a very interesting place to be at that moment in time. And it was, yes, a harsh managed isolation, which is what they call it, managed by the military. It's something that it was hard to imagine any American not being suspicious of. After you're released from managed isolation, you are free to live your life as you would. You just have to have a little app on your phone, and you have to hold it up to a barcode in a window of any business that you walk in or your apartment when you enter, so that it records your comings and goings in case there is a leak, as there sometimes are from the quarantine facilities. And then I, for one, who, you know, I'm a child of the 60s and early 70s. I certainly am not that. I'm a little suspicious of my privacies, but on the other hand, I was very grateful for that app. I was very grateful to be able to check where I had been, because God knows I can't remember in the time that I was there, and if I was in any danger of being exposed. So that's the long answer to New
Well,
Zealand.
I found it really fascinating. You and I spoke a couple of times, I think, on FaceTime, and we were in the first 2 weeks, you were in a sort of, it wasn't like a military hotel, but it was a kind of a gray kind of place, and you were allowed to go out once a day. And what amazed me is you were not allowed to touch the walls or the handles. Somebody would pick you up, I'm sure in a mask, open the doors for you, and you would go to a contained area so you could get a little bit of breath of fresh air, and then brought back after that. And that was
No fresh air. No, I in our particular, now listen, it depends on the facility you end up in, and evidently that's very random. So I don't want to, you know, say that we got a bad draw on the facility, which was not in one of the larger cities, but was in Wellington. And they only had 2 small hotels, kind of formerly Euro trash, I think. Is that an okay term to use? They were really badly decorated in a kind of post-disco black and gold. So it was a personal hell I was in. But the outside time ended up being only in a car park, which is underground. And so all the pipes for the methane gas run through it. So I was unable to go there out at all after a few days, because the air was in fact not fresh. And we were, you know, our exercise, 45-minute exercise, was just laps in that car park, which Arliss managed to continue to do, but I had to quit on, and, you know, I just had my yoga mat, which kept me alive. But, you know, it was an interesting payment. And I don't think that's a difficult segue to anything else you want to talk about now, Anne, because I think we humans, I'm really interested in the idea of payment, and that we aren't always brought up understanding that you have to pay for everything, and especially for everything that's dear, and that payment is not always monetary.
Yeah, that is a lesson which I have actually been learning again and again, but I think so remarkable, and I don't mean to stay on this hotel you were in, but because of the great care that was taken in your first 2 weeks, you kind of had a glorious time for the rest of the time. You were free. I mean, you did some shooting, but you also got to see New Zealand. And I think that notion of payment that you're talking about is something we maybe as a country need to undergo in order to find a new kind of freedom, is to find out what are our what are our restrictions that might ultimately bring us a greater freedom. I mean, I think of things like, I hate to bring this up, but you know, gun laws. Could we restrict ourselves in that area in order to have a better life? But you did go actually to work to New Zealand. And I think it's interesting that work is happening and has to happen in New Zealand. And I wonder if you just might, just for a moment, and then we'll get more philosophical, is just talk about the work that you did there. I mean, you were brought there to make something which is in the entertainment industry, can only be made under such circumstances. I wonder if you would just tell us a little bit about what that was.
So I was working on a series, you know, when the curtain fell in March, in Los Angeles. And we had finished half of the episodes. I'm not in all of them, but I still had several to go, like 3 or 4. And everything shut down. And then there was some talk of it being shot in Los Angeles. The only thing I ever told them is that I just couldn't see myself getting on a commercial flight because, you know, I'm just, you know, we all have to draw the bar for what we feel safe about doing right now. Anyway, the plans for California fell through as the numbers went up. And then Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who was producer and was directing the series, and A24 and Apple TV decided that, in fact, New Zealand was an option, and they put it together really fast. And I think they were one of the last productions to get in there. So ironically, when I got out of that managed isolation, I went into a cement soundstage that was built, you know, sort of brutalist soundstage that was built in the 70s. So what I saw of New Zealand for 3 weeks straight out of managed isolation was outside the window of my car on the way to work at 5 in the morning, and then on the way home at 7 when it was still light, I might add. Anyway, that was great. And we were just about to come home right after that, which would have been, you know, highly ironic, when I think it was Arliss that had the braver, smarter idea to stay an extra week and travel to the South Island, which is a primordial and amazing place. So there was that, which seems very dreamlike now on account of this frosting, to quote Paul Simon.
I'm so glad that you and Arliss had that time traveling and seeing those splendid landscapes that I've only seen pictures of. But so now you're back, and you and I are both, and everybody on this planet is facing a really rough time, and talk about restrictions, that we're living in a very restricted time. And I just wonder, what for you, how do you find joy? How do you find a sense of sort of human elixir in this really difficult time? We just lived through the last 2 days in the insurrection in Washington, D.C., of a kind of brutalist environment that we're living in. We're locked in, we're kept apart from one another. I mean, they call it social distancing. I don't think that's true. I think it's physical distancing. I think we're being very social. But I wonder how you find the elixir of life and joy amidst such severe circumstances that we're in.
Joy would be a reach for me right now, to use that word. Even enjoying, although there are small enjoyments, but I'm not sure that it's a time for joy. For me anyway, I don't think that has to be a part of every moment. I have found some real questions, which, you know, for me, I value greatly. It's very hard to come to a real question in life. You know, we have little questions all the time, but are we able to live in question? You know, in our everyday lives, we're so busy that really a question comes and goes, or maybe, you know, a moment of prayer comes and goes, or whatever you find, a meditation or a moment of silence. But to really live in question is an artist, to me, dream. And I guess I appreciate the challenge that I'm being given right now, which is to live in question, because I only have myself. I mean, even being with my husband, even when I get to see my family, I think it's become really clear to me that this is the opportunity right now. And now with the variant that you're living with in the UK, it seems to be extending. And those of us that aren't first or second on the list to get the vaccine, you know, our time is really interesting. And I have not had the life you have had on social media or Zoom, because I know you're teaching. I have the occasional thing like this, but I don't meet, that many people here. And yes, it's been really challenging. And even with a break, almost in a way, it was more difficult to come back to this, seeing that some people on the planet got it right. They were able to lock down and not feel threatened by that, and follow rules, and not feel invaded, and be for one another. There was a feeling, I guess I'll go back to one thing about New Zealand that I hesitate to use the word, but the nationalism that I felt there, the feeling of one nation, not under God, but with each other, one nation for each other. People stayed inside for each other, so that the other could have the same freedom that they were hoping for themselves.
That's so interesting for a number of reasons. I got an email yesterday from a friend of mine who's a wonderful, wonderful Taiwanese director, Stan Lai, and he's in Shanghai right now. And I was talking to him about coming to speak to my students via Zoom, of course. And he said, here in Shanghai, we are 75% full in the theaters. Life is normal. We've gone on. In Taiwan as well. Although he's flying back to Taiwan to direct a play, and he has to, guess what, quarantine for 2 weeks. But he said it couldn't happen in the States because for what you just described. And it seems to me that we're brought up in the United States with the image of the cowboy, which is we're alone on the goddamn, excuse my language, prairie with our gun, and it's all about the individual and the obsession with sort of standing out from the crowd and being separate. And what you're describing in New Zealand, and I think what Stan Lai is talking about, why in China or in Taiwan, there is a sense of we are in this together. There is a sense, I just remember, the first time I took City Company to Japan, and we got off the plane, this was in 1992, and everybody went for their bag, but the Japanese don't do it that way. The Japanese company, Suzuki's company, Scott Company came, they do a fire drill with bags. The idea of picking up your own bag and taking it to the bus is not going to happen. You pick up everybody's bag and you sort of pass it to the next person, and they all bring the bags to the bus together. And I saw in that very small gesture a cultural difference that's so profound. And I think, as you say, it's actually a description of why we're in trouble, why we're having such trouble right now. And it's cultural. It's not only political, it's cultural.
Yeah, there's a coarseness to individualism here. And when you said cowboy on the prairie with a gun, I mean, what is the need for that gun? Because that cowboy is not indigenous to that area. And so basically colonialism is what we are descendants of. And, we're colonialists. And so I think there's a shift, obviously, that's being asked, in deep, deep, deep shift, not just systemic racism, not to put it just in front of it, but we have to understand it in a deeply personal way. It's not just how am I supporting systemic racism, but what needs to shift in my being, in my essential being, and then therefore in my personality, to allow for this new way to be able to include the other.
I think you
otherwise we're going to die.
Alluded to it a little bit when you talked about living the question, in the sense that we have to make space for something to occur that hasn't occurred yet. And that's really terrifying. Rather than say, okay, I'm going to change my life and I'm suddenly going to function differently in the world. That's just another sort of impressing yourself on the world. But to actually create space, and to create space for questions, which ultimately I think is what the theater's about, which is why I'm a theater mensch. And it's about creating.
Right. Well, I think Right. And our basic education, which, you know, most artists disavow at some point, I dropped out sooner than you did, uh, is is aimed at finding answers, giving answers, being the first to answer, making sure you raise your hand to answer, finding the answers. That's our education. It's Western education. Now, that's fine if you're memorizing and, you know, you need to know factoids or whatever, but not only for the artist, but for the scientist, certainly, that's searching, for anyone that wants to make a discovery in their field. Excuse me, well, no, I'm not going to say, what the hell does an answer serve you except to, you know, be sure that you're educated about what people did before you. That's the only place an answer comes from. So the rest is all in question.
I have to ask you with genuine curiosity, why did you drop out? I mean, I was never, I was a dropout in that I was a hippie, but what impulse in you made you drop out of school?
Boy, I haven't been asked that for a freaking long time. You know, it's so hard to look back and give an honest answer, because obviously I'm going to color that answer with all the whatever I've gathered since then, you know, all my impressions of the world and myself, and so it's going to be a false answer. I think at the time, the closest I can come to an honest answer was it was instinctive. Mm-hmm. It was impulsive. I had a tendency to equate quitting things with finding out who I was, that I couldn't find out who I was anywhere that I was or from anyone that I would come in contact with. And now that's a rebellion that served me well in getting out of my, you know, original storm, and nothing to say about Ohio, although I'm from Cleveland. It was just a coincidence that I had to leave. It just, sometimes you have to escape your original storm to hear and think and see and feel for yourself. And then you can revisit with love. But I had to escape my original storm. And so it sort of included everything, including, and at that time I was paying for my own education. My parents couldn't afford it. I had helped to send my brother to school because that was more important in our family structure, that the man go to school. And so, you know, working a waitress job and paying for this college that I was, you know, not feeling really lit up by. I just thought, you know, I don't think I have all the time in the world.
But, you know, it's interesting you say that, Deborah, because I think as much as all of us try to change and develop through our lives and become new people and shed the old, there's always something that's like a DNA of who we are. You know, I mean, I sometimes think that, you know, the first play I ever directed, I was 15 years old. It was Eugene Ionesco's The Bald Soprano. And I was in high school, and it was in a really rotten high school. And it was in the...
How weird, Anne. That's just another synchronicity of ours, by the way, to interject.
Yes.
That was one of the first plays I ever saw.
No kidding.
How weird is that?
But you know, the thing is that in some ways, no matter how, the fact that I've spent a lifetime studying directing and being interested in it, and I think I direct exactly the way I did when I was 15, you know, and it's the same rhythm, it's the same sense of humor, it's the same use of time, it's the same obsession with space. It hasn't changed as much as I'd like to. And I wonder about that early, you know, dropping out on your part. Or there's, you know, there's a theory that, you know, you're a good beginner, a good middler, and a good ender, but you can't be good in all three. I'm a wonderful beginner. I'm a good at beginning of rehearsals. I'm lousy at ending rehearsals. which is why I work with actors who are obsessed with ending, because I'll walk into like a tech rehearsal at the Wexner. And I remember actually doing this exactly at the Wexner in Columbus. I walked in saying, oh my guys, we should do a show about Orson Welles. And the actor said, Anne, can you concentrate on finishing this show? But the reason I'm saying that is, in a way, we never change. I'm a lousy ender. I've always been a lousy ender. I'm a great beginner. I can start off really well. If I'm running, I used to run a lot. I run out of steam just before that place where you say, I'm going to run to that tree. I just start slowing down about 50 feet before the tree in every way. So when you say that you dropped out early, there's something so genuine though, in terms of you in that impulse to drop out.
But I didn't say I dropped out early. You did. I didn't use the word early. I think it's on time. And I think that I just might have said I dropped out, but you said dropped out early. So I mean, it's interesting. I also think it's interesting that you say, you have a goal like that. I'm going to run to that tree, and you kind of peter out before the tree. But I mean, I don't have to be like a psychoanalyst to tell you what that tree represents for you or what the end of a rehearsal might represent for you.
Please do tell me. I have no idea. You're the smartest psychotherapist
I know. But once we put something like that as our aim, it's synonymous with death. I mean, we can't, the question is, without a tree at the end of it, the question is, something that we will die with if we're fully present.
Okay, that's too deep. I'm going to take it in now and forget it the next time I'm heading for some sort of goal, because it's too profound. And as most philosophers say, the only thing to think about is sex and death, and you just tapped on one part of them. But
we could talk about the other one if you want.
Well, we could, but I want to follow up on this, what you brought up much earlier, about that we pay a price for what we get. You were in New Zealand, you had to pay the price of being in a stupid hotel for 2 weeks in order to gain some sort of freedom. And I wonder how true it is that we don't do the most, we don't do the best things unless they're hard. In other words, the size of the obstacle that we're facing determines the size of who I am as I approach it. And I think of you as somebody who actually makes things difficult in a way that makes you most creative, or more creative than other people. That there's a price, there's a cost, to do a play, and for you to do a film and or a play, there should be a cost, a necessary cost. And I also think that goes back to your basic proclivities of dropping out, not early, but making things hard is part of what makes it good. I just want to put that out there and see how you respond, Debra Winger.
Thank you, Anne Bogart. Well, I guess that brings us to suffering. And the idea of needless suffering versus intentional suffering. And I guess I see a certain control, not in the sense that I can control the outcome, but I can help myself to remain present by putting myself in a situation whereby I may suffer, instead of finding myself in one that I'm just trying to get out of. Because what kind of a life is that? And I would like to say that I wouldn't, now listening to it, I would not use the term dropping out, but dropping in. That's what it feels like inside of me, is that it's just like when people say, why do you walk away from things? Why did you retire? I always am facing the thing I'm walking towards, so I have no effing idea what they're talking about. Like I know what they're talking about intellectually, of course. I said no to movies, or I say no to whatever that is they're addressing. But for me, I am dropping in to the thing that I'm interested in, and that is waking me up, and that is keeping me alert. And if that, as it came back, you know, things started to, I started to feel the pull towards projects again because they were enlivening.
Right.
So I don't see the in and out the same way as all.
Yeah, I hear you, because I know as an actress, I mean, is that what makes you good is you do drop in. Like there's a thing called reverberation or resonance that happens. You don't, you drop into something and you resonate, I would say. I mean,
Ooh, I
I've
love
never,
that word. You know, I love that word.
yes, but I mean,
Because
I've never
for
worked.
something to resonate, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. To some, I'm very interested.
No, I
Finish
mean,
that sentence.
for something to resonate, I mean, alchemically, you have to have that part, you have to have something inside of you for it to resonate with. You
Right.
can't,
Right.
you know,
Yes.
if it goes, yeah.
What I was going to say is I've never worked with you as an actress. You're my friend, but we did do one evening together with Sarah. It was like a Sarah Bernhardt evening at the Jewish Museum 100 years ago in New York. And you did a reading, and I watched you actually go to the microphone or whatever it was. Maybe there was no microphone. And you basically dropped in and something started resonating. You know, you allow something to resonate with you, and it's extraordinary to see. And I think that's probably what gives you what is part of your success also in film, in television, on the stage, is that resonance that you're able to sit in, which is why, going back to our moment of COVID, when you say joy is not something I feel, I believe you, because actually you're feeling the moment, which is something else. You can't just manufacture joy, but you're experiencing the time we're living in. And my hope is that whatever you're going through now will help us get out of where we are. I don't know how that will happen.
I have to be very careful what I expose myself to right now, because in the beginning, back in March, but back in March when everything started, you know, to become clear, which was way later than it should have become clear, as we learn now. I almost couldn't, I didn't know how to bear it.
Yeah.
Not just because of my own fear or my own despair, fighting that off, not giving into that, but because this collective grief was. And now you know, my very dear friend, not sure you met, is an ICU nurse in LA. And that's pretty much been my weekly dropping in as far as COVID goes. I have to save I have to save it for her, because she needs it when she comes off of her 3-day shift, and I wouldn't have any to spare after that. That's how bad it is out there right now.
So you call her, you talk to her, and you try to
We have a FaceTime.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we FaceTime when she is finished with her 3-day shift, because she can't, you know, that's a moment of like dissociation for her, because she has to come back into the world. She has to go around and see people perhaps without masks. She has to experience a world that doesn't understand what's going on in there. Last week they ran out of body bags at her hospital. And then she has to go home and do grocery shopping, you know. And I think that we don't, I had this idea that, you know, since so much of the talk is what are you watching, and what are you binging, and what content are you consuming, that wouldn't it be interesting if there was a mandatory hour of binging for every household inside of an ICU or an ER, just so that we might feel connected with the other, with just these things other than numbers that we see on a news report. We're not connected. We don't really, especially as time goes on, it becomes more difficult to stay connected with this as a reality. You can see why people think it's over, or isn't going to pertain to them, or they're exempt, or they're immune. I don't know.
Well, the numbers are so overwhelming, and the neuroscientists say that you can't relate to numbers. Like, you can't relate to a number of people who have died, but you can relate to, and you can empathize with a specific single person or one circumstance, which is why I think people do watch Netflix so much, because you take these moments of empathy for these characters in these films or these series. And so then the question is, where do we go from here? How do we reconnect? That's not really a question for you, because that's unfair, Deborah, to even ask that question, because it's so immense. But I guess I just want to make space for it. It's huge.
Well, it's a question for us. It's not a question with an answer. But I think that the more we can, each and every one of us, ask ourselves these things every day, then we'll at least be open to listening.
Yeah.
To a call somewhere from someone.
Yeah. On a completely different note, just to sort of drag us out of the existential situation we're in, I was talking once to it's a theater and opera director named Tim Albury, who's really wonderful, born in England. He lives in Canada. And I asked him, I was with my students, I said, do you only do projects you love? Something like that. And he said, oh no, he said, I've got 4 kids to feed. I take everything that's offered, whatever is offered. He said, I used to think that that I only should do things that I'm passionate about. And then he said, the greatest adventures that I've had are on things that I did not want to do, or did it not for reasons of passion. And he said, those were where I've learned the most and had the greatest adventures. And I thought, that's really interesting, because I'm always telling my students, only, work from passion, choose projects you're passionate about. And yet he was saying it's actually the adventures that he doesn't expect. And I know you've had, a whole lifetime of choosing project or leaving projects or deciding to do something. And I wonder if you have a response to that, the idea, because you do have to, in a sense, pay for your growth as a human being. You can't just, you have to go through a certain, and you use the word, so I'll use it, certain kind of suffering in order to grow. You have to meet certain obstacles. And I imagine that Tim Albury was meeting the obstacle of doing things he didn't particularly feel passionate about, but then found something in it. And I don't know if that rings any bells with you.
Well, I was spoiled because I got success early, which I didn't go after. I didn't seek it. I wanted to just be acting. I didn't understand that would ever happen to me. It was a total shock, and maybe I didn't even catch up with it for a while, so I acted like an asshole for a while. And maybe still act like an asshole. Probably do, actually. For sure I do. Okay. Got through the whole morphous of that. But what I was going to say is that it is a teeny bit of a voice that comes in that says it's different when you are physically when you're an actor, as opposed to a director. If my name could just appear on things, and my visage and my body and my soul, I know that it takes the same, but it's just weird. It's weirdly different. I'm not a director. I have produced things that I did not want to produce, but I did because of other reasons, and I learned a lot and they were painful, but I'm not, I don't ever fool myself that I could direct. And I think I do other things. To me, it's a waitress question that I posed to myself early on, which was, if there was a long enough dry spell, I would wait on tables before I would take a job that I couldn't resonate with.
Mhm.
And sometimes I make mistakes. Those are the things I get stuck in, but I wouldn't knowingly go into something that I cannot find some resonance with, because that would be certain death, not suffering and growth. So no, I can't say that I do that, but I have found other ways to make money when I've needed money.
Yeah.
And I have found ways to enliven myself other than acting. I taught briefly, and I wrote briefly, and I tried to write. And yeah.
But I really hear you when you say as an actor, it's different than as a director. Although I would say there's some really painful situations you can be in as a director when things go wrong. That's all I have to say. It's not like you're standing outside of it. It can be terribly painful.
No, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it that way. I just meant in the sense that
it's your body.
When you leave the room, it's you have to heal your soul, but you don't get turned into wallpaper on somebody's TV ad nauseum, ad infinitum, forever and ever, it seems. Not
Very
to say
true.
that I've had this experience.
But that's something that what you went through as a young person growing into the world, almost nobody has gone through what you went through. I mean, the kind of trajectory of your early career was phenomenal. And I don't think people can actually relate to it because it's so extreme, like getting on a rocket and going.
Certainly my children cannot. It's very weird to try to explain, no, we didn't have VHS. Like, what's VHS? What's a VCR? But I mean, to think that you had to go to the movies, we can hardly, there's a whole generation of people that do not know that existed. And I don't feel that old, but I am, I guess. They look at me like, I'm talking about the Mesozoic era, but I just think that it was also weird to be, I don't know how any of that happened. And I do think sometimes of, a separate, the thing that is Debra Winger. It's not really something that I take in as who I am, but now it seems really you just have to get out of a car with no underwear and you're on the cover of a magazine. So, or you have a reality show, or I don't know. Sure, I got out of the car without any underwear. Just was no one there to photograph it. Thank God.
Yeah, it's hard now because
I've really gone off the rails here.
but that's okay. But let me ask you one more question about that. Is you must have learned something from that trajectory as a human being. Like what wisdom came out of actually having a career like that?
I'm not sure I can answer that, because it's such a complimentary question. There's a compliment in assuming that I have some wisdom. I will say that I had the good sense to slow it all down at some point, or to go back and retrieve the parts of me that I thought were undeveloped.
Yeah.
And you cannot keep vigilant on all your parts when you are, in that centrifugal force of, success. And I didn't know that until I was older. But it was just like, you know, a wild ride. And I have seen people just keep parlaying that into, you know, it usually comes with a couple of facelifts too, because, you know, that centrifugal force is really great for your skin, makes you look great. You're soaring through space. So you try to preserve that original, you know, it's like chasing the first high. And it's tragic, really. You can't do it. So I do think there was a moment of grace. It was like a hunk of grace, because I can't take any responsibility, although I would consider myself a seeker, but I don't know if I really even know how to do that. But I was searching for what it was, what effect. Well, just the question you asked, I was asking myself. And so I had to seemingly stop in the eyes of, you know, other people, or, you know, people that look at your career as the major part of who you are, that would look like I stopped. It would look like I dropped out. But for me, I was retrieving some things that I felt I was missing.
Yeah. Well, that's a huge, what you did drop a huge pearl of wisdom. As much as you do not think you're wise, you're one of the wisest people I know. And I know that if I have a question about something that I'm completely confused about, you usually have an answer right away. But what I want to say is that when you just said slow down, that's huge. And I think it's a lesson to us. Now, I've certainly learned it over these last 9.5 months, is slow down. And we were going at such a
Which is just an
tremendous speed.
illusion, right? Time
Well,
is an illusion. I mean, speed and time, it's an illusion, really, because you could be, I don't know, do you know, I have a question for you. Am I allowed to ask you a question?
yeah, it's a conversation.
Oh, it hasn't been much of one, I'm sorry. I wonder if you know people that whose world hasn't opened up. You spoke of a friend that, you know, was in 75% theaters, and, you know, 75% filled theaters. But
Yeah.
in this isolated stage of life, I have not spoken to too many people that have been exploding with creativity. You know, I have definitely read some incredible essays. Zadie Smith's, you know, book of 6 essays about this
Yeah.
time was really,
Yeah.
I think, the latest thing that I discovered. But I don't know, maybe writers are writing, and maybe actors are feeling enlivened by their Zoom theater, which I haven't watched that much of, granted. But you know, I know painters that are struggling. I know sculptors that are struggling. It doesn't seem to be, from my perspective, and certainly for me, incredibly alive, creative time. And maybe we just have a little bit of a corner to turn, and that comes.
Yeah.
I feel that there's some deep acceptance that hasn't happened inside of me yet.
I think you're right in that we've seen a lot of people do a lot of things online, but almost none of them are any good. All of the especially in the theater world, everybody's doing readings and Corona dances, and you know, they're all awful. And I think that what's
Well, I
happening,
don't want to be so judgmental, but right, it's a menial in a way. It's not. There's
but what
nothing,
it is,
and maybe it's.
but what it is, it's self-expression. And I actually don't think that really great art is self-expression. It's about creating conditions for something. And I just want to say, what's helped me a lot is, you know, there's the Italian director named Eugenio Barba, who lives in Denmark. He asked a question: what is it that all actors in the world share, even if they have come from different cultures, even if they come from different speak different languages? And the answer is, it's a word in Danish called satz, S-A-T-S. and it is the moment before an action. And that's what all actors share together as the same. And that satz is something that, I know nothing about archery, but if you are an archer, the satz is the moment before you release the arrow. And so what we're doing now, and I think is happening, is cultivating sats. I think it's wrong to self-express right now. Now time is to store this the moment before, so that our action will be clear and expressive, and action that actually means something in the world. But I think it's going back to what you said of living with the question. It's like cooking it and taking care of it. It is not the time right now, I think. And I think
So
that's why
Anne
you're not.
Bogart, Anne Bogart, now you know why I said yes when you asked this ridiculous thing of me to do this interview with you, because you just made the whole thing worth it, not only for me, but I'm sure for the listeners. Satz. And
Satz.
I can count on you for that. Satz.
Well,
and I love the analogy of the archer,
yeah,
because
yeah,
actually have you ever done that? I had to do that when I was Wonder Girl. I had to learn how to.
See, that's where our worlds are different, Deborah. Is you played Wonder Girl.
18 years old. You know,
I just think,
get those strong arms.
While you were like in Hollywood making all those amazing films and Wonder Girl, I was like walking the streets of downtown New York trying to do theater on the streets. We had very different backgrounds, but we're coming to the end of our little tete-a-tete, and I just want to say that you're wrong, that satz is not the leading topic of this conversation, but you've actually had a lot of wonderful things to say, and I think they will have a ripple effect, or shall I use the word resonance, for those who share this.
Well, both of those words come from you, satz and resonance, and I would say that our friendship is predicated not only in just a deep and abiding love, which we don't know where it springs from, but from the fact that whenever I talk to you, with you, I feel energized. I never feel enervated. I always feel like I'm onto something, and we're onto something. So thank you for that.
Well, then I have only one word to say to that, and then we'll end this this conversation, and that is likewise.